Hi, I'm Dr. Michael Lindsey, and I am a guest on Nothing to Lose But Yourself podcast, hosted by Ricky Day.
My guest today on the podcast is Dr. Michael A. Lindsey. Michael Lindsey is a noted scholar in the fields of child and adolescent mental health, as well as a leader in the search for knowledge and solutions to generational poverty and inequality. He's the dean and the Paulette Goddard Professor of Social Work at NYU Silver School of Social Work and an Aspen Health Innovators Fellow. Additionally, Dr. Lindsey led the working group of experts supporting the Congressional Black Caucus Emergency Task Force on Black Youth Suicide and Mental Health, which created the report Ring the Alarm, the Crisis of Black Youth Suicide in America. He is a distinguished fellow of the National Academics of Practice in Social Work and a fellow of the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare. Dr. Lindsey was also appointed by the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention to the Community Preventative Services Task Force, and in 2023, he was appointed to the New York City Board of Health. He holds a PhD in social work, an MPH from the University of Pittsburgh, an MSW from Howard University, and a BA in sociology from Morehouse College. Dr. Lindsey also completed a two-year postdoctoral fellowship in public health at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and I think there's no doubt he is educated and armed for his duties, but he brings a lot more to bear, and let's find out about that now. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Michael A. Lindsey. How are you, sir?
Ricky Day, hey, my brother, good to see you. Great to be here. I'm excited about this conversation and just really applaud you for all that you're doing to advance the culture.
Thank you. I appreciate you, and really grateful to you for all the work that you do. You do some amazing work. And those of you listening or watching, don't think that I'm being disrespectful when I refer to him as Michael, but I've been instructed to call him Michael, so that is what I am going to do.
Absolutely.
Before we dive, man, into this, I think a really important conversation. I want to do two things. One is I want to let folks know that we're going to talk about some things that may be difficult to hear. So if you are concerned or you're concerned about a trigger that may trigger you, please be aware of that now. And I'll be putting that in the show notes as well. Secondly, we are going to share some resources that will be of use to you if you or a loved one or anybody you know is in need of mental health services or any of the services that we are talking about today. And then third, and I think in many ways most important thing is I think we make these assumptions that people know what these various fields are, and that's not the truth at all. And so, what I'd really love for you to do, Michael, is to clarify and provide for some clarity for folks of the definitions and the distinctions between psychiatrists and psychiatry, psychologists and therapy, and what that is, and social work and social workers, especially social work, because so many of us particularly people from communities of color or low income communities, when you think of social workers, you think of the people that are coming to take the kids. And that is in no way, shape, or form fully what that industry is about. So can you please kind of help us understand what the distinctions are and what the definitions are?
Yeah, my pleasure. And it's a really, really great place to start, Ricky, because I think there's so much confusion about it all. So let me start with psychiatry. Psychiatry basically is a you go to medical school to get a medical degree in psychiatry. It's one of the forms of practice, as we know. It's like you have a pediatrician. It's a specialization
Mhm.
within the field of medicine. And psychiatrists, they typically prescribe medications for mental health challenges like depression or trauma, or even the more severe forms of mental illness like schizophrenia. So
Mhm.
they mostly prescribe medication. There are some psychiatrists who actually do the traditional talk therapy. Psychologists are typically trained at the PhD level,
Mhm.
and they are also engaged in talk therapy, but they do something else that's distinctive. They actually do psychological testing. So psychologists will be able to determine whether someone has any cognitive delays, or they're able to determine whether a child is on the autism spectrum. They really are trained on how to do those really fine-grained kinds of tests that are going to determine your educational aptitude or skill
Hmm.
level, that sort of thing, right? But they also do engage in talk therapy. And then social workers are actually the largest provider of mental health services among all of the mental health professionals that I just named: psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, right?
Hmm.
So, social workers actually engage in a lot of the work around talk therapy. So, if you're going to see a therapist, the likelihood is that you're going to go to someone who's trained as a social worker, because they are the most plentiful of the professions that are providing those services. And social workers tend to go to school for 2 years in an MSW program. I'm actually dean, as you mentioned at the top of the show, of the Silver School of Social Work, and I applaud and welcome anyone that wants to pursue social work. Talk to me, because I'd be happy to talk to you about our program. And then what happens that you go to school for 2 years, you get trained on all of the techniques and that sort of thing, and then you practice for 2 years, and then you're able to sit for your license to basically hang your shingle and become an independent licensed clinical social worker. So that's basically the breakdown in a nutshell.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for that. I think that's really informative because, growing up, one of my favorite movies was Claudine. And when we think about
Mm,
social workers, I think, go right to Claudine in my mind. And I don't think people really understand the servants to society that social workers actually are, and how
right.
beneficial they are to the
Oh, can
community.
I just say one more
Yeah,
thing too?
please.
Yeah, because you actually hit upon that, and I want to reflect on it a bit more, which is that social workers do have a sort of negative moniker in terms of what they traditionally have been known to do. In fact, I got to be honest. When I first learned of social work when I was at Morehouse, I asked one of my professors who recommended that I should pursue a career in social work. I said, "Don't they take children from families and that sort of thing?" And because I mean, I think in some of our communities that we grew up in, that's what we knew social workers to do.
Yeah.
And so there is a practice within social work known as child welfare practice. And so, they are concerned about the well being of children, broadly speaking, and but it's not just a sort of single focus, if you will, regarding what social workers do. We have social workers who are in political office, social workers who focus on public and social policy,
Hmm.
social workers, as I mentioned, obviously doing therapy and providing mental health supports and services. So there's a range of what social workers do, even social workers who are now, working in corporate spaces. And
Hmm.
so it's really a range. And I just wanted to put that out there.
No, thank you. That's important to know. And we're a little later in the conversation. We're going to dive into kind of the lack of people of color in the field, and I'll get into
Yeah.
that a little later. But suffice to say, there's not a ton of people of color in the field, and certainly Black men. Tell me a little bit about where you're from and your upbringing, and what led you to pursue this career that you're pursuing as a servant in this field.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I am from Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
I was born and raised in Southeast Washington, D.C. And so it's funny,
Okay.
I was just in a conversation with a sister a couple of days ago who went to Howard University, who's from New York. And I mentioned that I was from DC. And she said, "Where'd you grow up?" And I said, "Southeast." She goes, "Oh," she took a step back, because Southeast is one of the areas of DC that folks will tell you to stay away from. It obviously has, unfortunately, been parts of it neglected,
Mhm.
um, and really cast aside. It's obviously has dealt with its share of violence, substance use, and that sort of thing, right? So I grew up in the heart or midst of all of that. What was interesting when I was growing up, Ricky, is that Marion Barry, former mayor of DC, Marion Barry, actually lived in Southeast and lived in walking distance from my home
This is before he was mayor or during the time he was mayor?
during the time he was mayor.
Wow.
During the time he was mayor, and so I actually admired Marion Barry a lot. A lot of folks will recall that he was caught on TV smoking crack, and that's the sort of indelible impression that folks have of him. But he was much, much more than that. But all that to say, Ricky, that I grew up in that context and saw a lot of things. Being raised by a single mother, raising five black men, alone, right? And
First of all, shout out to your mom for
yeah, shout out
raising
to my
five
mom.
black men by
Yes,
herself. That's
yes,
that's that's
yes,
tough under any circumstance.
absolutely, absolutely. And so I saw so many things that I questioned. I even questioned, like, why is my dad not around as much as he could be or should be? What were the circumstances that led to the demise of my parents' marriage? Right?
Hmm.
I why is there drugs and crack, and I saw the devastation that crack, for example, had on our community, on families and individuals that were hardworking, God fearing, just trying to pursue the American dream, and then for one reason or another became addicted to crack and then lost it all. So I grew up in that era and began to question all of these things and really reflect on the juxtapositions. In fact, I remember, Ricky, when I was growing up, the motorcade that the president would ride along to go to Andrews Air Force Base sometimes made its way through our community.
Wow.
And I would say to myself, wow, doesn't the president see all of this around us and want to do something about it? You know, and so those kinds of things led me to question a lot. And
I can imagine. That's
I had a family friend who went to Morehouse who convinced me very early in my adolescent years that I was a Morehouse man. I was Morehouse material, and I just didn't see it because, like many young folks, all I knew was what was around me. And even if I read things in a book that furthered my imagination, I still was relegated to what I see that is in front of me. And this is all that I know,
yeah, that's real. That's real.
And so one of the powerful things about like just being present in a young person's life is that, young folks are impressionable and they only have the imagination to the extent that something is presented before them, opportunities to go beyond what is convenient or in their proximity.
Yeah.
And thank God for this gentleman, David Person, who went to Morehouse himself, who gave me an opportunity, thank God, to think about myself beyond the environment that I was in. I'm sorry to be long winded about this, but
Not at
it
all.
really, 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 touches me. And when I reflect on it, because you started off with reading off my credentials, the degrees I have obtained, and it seems like when reading that, I had this kind of rational, linear trajectory. Like
Hmm.
everything was intentional.
Hmm.
And in my humility, I will honestly convey that it was not intentional. I had no idea where I was going and what I would do.
Yeah.
I had a praying mother, who said, listen, go to school every day, bring home A's. If I go out to work and work two jobs to make ends meet, you're going to get up every day and go to school,
Mhm.
and you're going to bring home good grades. So all that to say, it led me to Morehouse, and it was a professor, as I mentioned, who said to me, I think you should pursue a career in social work. And I looked at her as if she was crazy. And I said, why? I want to be a lawyer. I want to make a lot of money. And she said, listen, I read your papers, hear the things that you are convicted by in our class discussions. And I think that this is a really, really great profession for you to pursue, because you not just want to talk about these issues and pontificate ad nauseum about them. You want to do something about them. Because I was convicted by what I saw and experienced growing up,
Yeah,
and came into social work and in this space because I wanted to do something about it. And the last thing I'll say is this: the crack era had a really, really, really strong impact on me because, as I mentioned, I saw the devastation that it had on individuals and communities. And I saw that folks who struggled with addiction, I don't know how, God, Ricky, I guess, but I was able to surmise that folks are not becoming addicted to crack and other substances because they want to have fun. That for a lot of people, this was a coping mechanism, it was a medication
absolutely.
for the pain and turmoil in their lives. And so then I began to have an appreciation for mental health. And it was almost like it was an epiphany moment for me, Ricky, because when I began to read text in undergrad at Morehouse about mental health and the great legends in psychology like Naeem Akbar and Dr. Lawrence Gary, who was my mentor and professor at Howard School of Social Work, talk about how mental health was an undercurrent matter in a lot of the life circumstances and outcomes for blacks. I said, this is it. I want to understand mental health. And that began my journey into this space.
What a journey. I mean, a few things jump out at me from your remarks. And one of them is the importance of each of us in the lives of those who are existing with us in community, right? Those people that pointed you in what would turn out to be the right direction, those people that saw a passion and a spark of interest in you and encouraged you to nurture it. They not only did a wonderful service for you, but they've done a wonderful service for all the people that you now care for and serve. And so it's so important for each of us to step up and contribute to each other's lives in positive ways wherever possible. You never know what if that one little seed of a possibility of an idea that you plant in somebody, what that's going to sprout into. But when that's coming from a good place, it's important to share that. And so I thank you for sharing that, because that professor and that gentleman who's a friend of your family, I mean, those are really important figures, not only in your life, but in the lives of every life that you touch personally. And I think it's important to know that, man, because so often we look at the problems that we face and they seem so huge and so insurmountable. And what can I do? And we just get depressed, no pun intended. We get depressed about the enormity of the issues that we face. But when you look at the little contributions that each of us can make to solving the problem, the sum of those quite often provides a solution and provides some salvation and some freedom for us all. So I thank you so much for sharing that. That's important. The other thing is, I think there's this in American society in general, and absolutely in Black and brown communities, there's this artificial and sometimes real, divide that kind of exists, right, between the educated and the so-called non-educated, and some of that is, the academics and intellectual elite can be a little elitist and look down on people that don't understand them using 17 syllable words to explain a problem. I mean, there's some of that, but then some of it is people, looking up and say, "Oh, you're not black anymore. You don't get what we're going through." Quite often just because of titles and not understanding that you are somebody from the same community, from the same kinds of experiences, but you saw a problem and you wanted to figure out how you can contribute to that. And so getting your education, getting the tools to be able to build solutions to these problems is your active service to other people. And I think it's important for us on all the different sides of that to understand that we're in this stuff together. And it takes highly educated people who know the field to be able to contribute. But it also takes the lay person to contribute in the ways that they can, like those people that help you. It's important just to look at that and the totality of that. So I appreciate you.
I'm getting emotional right now. You're about to make me cry,
I have
man.
a feeling we're going to both cry during this episode. It is what it is. And
Uh,
people need to see the black men cry too. So it's all good.
yeah. I'll tell you why, Ricky, because I think you're spot on, first of all, about this sort of divide, right? And for me, I lead with humility.
Mm-hmm.
And the humility is based on my life circumstances, which I have not forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
My origin, where it all started for me, and the challenges that have been presented to me, and that through prayer and support of my family and in the encouragement to move forward, I have been able to overcome. And so I can't I can't disown my history from my current reality.
Mm-hmm.
And every day I think about all of this journey, how far I've come, and it does give me great humility. And I lead with that. I just I just want to be God's humble servant,
Yeah.
and serve.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, no, you're welcome, and thank you. And let's just build on that. I'm gonna share something that I know that you know personally. So if you feel like joining in, join in. But I'm gonna share this as context to this next portion of our conversation. And what that is that we are an ever evolving community of visionaries, dreamers, and doers who have been called by God to live the lives we created to live, commanded by God to love beyond the limits of our prejudices, and commissioned by God to serve. We live, we love, we serve. That's the identity statement. For those of you listening, you probably heard me say that before, but that's the identity statement of FCBC, which is First Corinthian Baptist Church here in New York, and our great pastor, Michael Wallen. That's the identity statement he formed for our congregation. But it's something that I know that all of us live by, that we are created to live the lives we were created to live, not to be jealous of and try to live somebody else's life, but to live the life you were created to live. And that we know that we are called to love. If you're going to be a follower of Jesus, you can say you're a Christian. You're not hating. You're not discriminating against people. You're not locking kids in cages. You're not attacking trans people. You are called to love beyond the limits of your prejudices. And chief among those, the call is we're commissioned to use the gifts that come through us to serve others. We all have gifts. Every person in this world, including that homeless person that you walk past every day and ignore, they have a gift. They're here because there's a gift inside them. And that gift is not for them. That gift is meant to come through them to be of service to other people. And so when we're not helping each other and giving each other a hand up, you don't know what the world is missing out. The little black kid that you killed because you think he's going to steal Skittles, but he actually was just wearing a hoodie because he was cold, might have been the kid that's going to find the cure to cancer. So to live the life you created to live, to love beyond the limits of your prejudices, and to use your gifts to serve other people, if we all can just do those things, I think we transform the world. And you're clearly doing that. And people in your profession are really engaged in that, because it's not a high money profession, which is also people should know. Can you share specifically, where that comes from, that spirituality comes from in you, and what specifically is the focus of your work, and how it's benefiting the world, how you're serving other people with your gifts and what you do?
Yeah. Wow. So the spirituality definitely comes from my mom and what she instilled in me in terms of a spiritual ethic very early in our lives, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, we went to church and served faithfully in the church and that sort of thing. But there were some spiritual principles that my mom instilled in us very, very early. So, for example, there's a really strong spiritual principle related to finding meaning in suffering, right?
Mm-hmm.
And certainly being Black in America and the historical legacy of slavery has certainly helped us to understand that history of and legacy related to finding meaning and suffering. And so, what my mom said to us was, yes, this is our current circumstance, but it does not define the totality and longevity of our experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, what is it about this moment that we can learn from and be able to gain that insight that's going to propel us forward? So,
Yeah.
for example, you know, having lights cut off or using other kinds of ways to bring heat into the house, whatever we had to do to survive. My mom would say, "This is why I want you to go to school and pay attention and learn and bring home A's, because education is a vehicle out of this." And the other thing that my mom would say to us is that, and this is going to speak to people, that we are uniquely made by God,
Mm-hmm.
every one of us. Whatever we look like, however we define or identify ourselves, we are uniquely made by God. And because of that, we have a responsibility to ensure that others who identify like us, and we have the opportunity to learn from mistakes and find meaning in suffering, our responsibility is to ensure that no one else who identifies like us, who looks like us, have to go through those same things,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
And so that is rejuvenating in the midst of turmoil because, wow, God uniquely made me to be in this space, in this moment, to have great impact on others. You said it earlier. You don't know what little gristle or nugget of hope that you might instill in someone that's going to propel their lives forward, that may actually save their lives because of some small, seemingly small deed you've done to make their lives better, right? So that's the origin of my sort of spirituality that began to help me to hone in on this sense of mission and purpose. God, what am I uniquely purposed to do? What is my calling, my assignment? And that led me, as I mentioned earlier, into the space of the meaning of and suffering that
Mm-hmm.
I experienced growing up, led me into the space of mental health. And I said, wow, I want to be able to help others. So early in my career as a social worker, I was a psychotherapist working in a community mental health clinic.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that I faced when working with minorities is the stigma related to mental illness. We don't talk about our problems or concerns with the therapist. We don't even want to define really that we're dealing with depression, anxiety, or trauma, right? So
Yeah.
we kind of push that back because our society has told us that in order to be successful, you have to be quote unquote perfect. And everything that we see about success is always predicated upon perfection. And so it doesn't give people the space or the agency to be able to say, I'm not perfect, or how does one get to be successful if they are a person of color or they have an identity that is quote unquote not the norm, right? Because those things are supposedly the barriers to success. They hold you back. And so within our community, we don't talk about mental illness because we're so fixated on trying to be perfect because that is what we're told success looks like.
That's so unfortunate because first of all, it's not true.
It's not true.
And secondly, I completely support what you're saying, and because I know it's true, I've seen it in my life, I've seen it in my experiences, and so often people also view it as weakness, right? And because
Mm.
it's viewed as weakness, so often, not only does it take this mental health moment or mental health condition that you're dealing with, and prevent you from getting the care that you need and the treatment that you need and the support you need. But it also quite often metastasizes into something else because if it's viewed as weakness and you can't present to the world the authenticity of what you're feeling, what you're going through right now. I'll use depression as an example. If you view depression and mental illness in that form as weakness and you can't share that with the world, it's still there. It's going to come out in some form or fashion. And quite often, well, it is approved behavior for me to come off strong and aggressive and angry. And so I'm going to use that as the way to express what I'm dealing with on the inside. And so it starts to make you think about and look at the things that we're dealing with, the violence among our youth and the things that are happening in Chicago and other cities across
Mm.
this country. How much of that is mental health issues and depression and a lack of hope in people's lives manifesting as anger and aggression when it's really something that people need care for. So I just wanted to call that out because that's really profound what you just shared.
Yeah, yeah, no question. I think that the untreated and addressed mental health issues are challenges, I should say, are an underpinning of a lot of what happens.
And then you add in the free flow of guns in our society to that mix. That's a deadly mix.
Absolutely, absolutely. I do work in the context of schools, and one of the things we often find, Ricky, is that there's not the behavioral health or mental health supports for kids in schools that are needed. And oftentimes for Black and Brown kids, and even Monique Morris in her book Push Out, she documented what's happening with Black girls are being suspended or expelled from school
Mhm.
at higher rates, right? And not having access to mental health supports. But we can go on and on. It begins that vicious cycle. If you're not getting those issues addressed, then the likelihood is that you're going to turn that pain and anger out on someone. It's definitely connected to violence and other things that we're seeing. One of the things I will say is that I got into the work then around trying to address it because what I believe, Ricky, and this is a hope of a message of hope,
Mhm.
is that having the opportunity to address your mental health needs, the anger that I experienced, let me just get real with it, right? The anger that I experienced growing up because my dad wasn't in the home, and the hostility that I had that I wanted to take out on someone because I was angry needed to be resolved because I was going to be a danger to myself or someone else, right? And very early, I was able to, in my career as a social worker, I was able to get into my own therapy and began to unpack all of that. And it made me realize how awesome it is when you do have an opportunity to be in therapy and to release that pain and anger, or to even tap into how it has impacted your life in ways that you don't even imagine. Your relationships, how you show up at work, how you feel about your own viable options in terms of, whether it's education or whether you see yourself doing X, Y, and Z 10, 15 years from now in terms of how forecast your life. All of that's related to your mental health. And so to be able to resolve those issues and to understand and come to a place where before my dad died, I was able to have a relationship with him that I would not have been able to have been able to forgive him had I not had my own therapy, and to understand that the way that he showed up in our family was related to his own trauma and pain that went unresolved, right? So I just think that if folks could understand the beauty of what it looks like to tap into your mental health and well-being and how it can make you be at 100% when you may not even realize you think you're operating at 100%, but you may be at 60% because there's some stuff back here that impacts your life on a daily basis that you've buried and have no idea that it is impacting your life. I mean, one quick anecdote, and I'll just, we can move forward. Obviously, I'm just captivated by this conversation. Thank you for all that you're doing. But like, Ricky, I didn't know until I went into my own therapy, deep-seated trauma that I had, that my therapy brought out. It was buried. I didn't even realize. But my first traumatic event in my life was actually at the age of 4 years old. And my mom was carpooling to work and she was dropping me off at daycare. And we were standing at the corner of 11th and Pennsylvania Avenue in Southeast DC on Capitol Hill when a gentleman walked up to us with a sawed-off shotgun and demanded that my mom give him her purse. My mom wrapped me in her coat and said, "Please don't hurt my baby." And she gave him willingly her purse and he ran off. I didn't even realize until I was in my own therapy that that was my first traumatic event and I buried it. But I grew up with a level of anxiety, not really fully understanding where that came from.
Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that. That's important to share because people need to understand and hear what you're saying about the role of understanding and uncovering what's going on in your own mental health, to how you're existing in your life and how you're moving in the world. And it manifested for you as anxiety. Think about it. For somebody else, it might have been manifested as, that ain't never going to happen to me again. I wish an MF would. And then you become this aggressive, angry, defensive, and you let your fear turn into violent tendencies in your life. And again, that doesn't serve you or the community or people that you love well. So no, it's complex, and it's particularly in our youth, and that's really kind of the focus of your work. And I want to talk about that a little bit. Again, you guys, we're gonna leave you. Don't worry. We're gonna turn this around and leave you with hope. But we gotta. It's like a sermon. You gotta identify for folks what the challenge is, and then we can talk about what some of the possible cures are and the ways we can move forward. But I want to call some things out because they are shocking, and scary for me. And to be clear, first of all, be clear. I care about all human beings. I think that anybody who knows me or listens to the show knows that. And of course, I most certainly care about all children. But however, due to focus of your work and due to what we're talking about today, I want to focus this on Black kids and Black and brown kids. And I'm going to read some stats, and we're going to put links to this in the show notes so you guys can go do the research and read up on this yourself if you seem inclined to do that. So here's just a few things. From 2000 to 2020, Black youth ages 10 to 19 experienced the largest increase in suicide rates, a shocking 78%. In a research study among the youngest children ages 5 to 12, again, children 5 to 12, Black youth were approximately 2 times more likely to die by suicide than their white counterparts. And in other trends, suicide rates are also growing among other children of color, as well as among youth who identify as LGBTQ+. A factor in this, you guys, of course, is that's related to youth childhood suicide is adverse child experiences. Those are things like domestic violence, financial hardship, or losing a parent. And Black youth are more likely than their counterparts to be overrepresented in environments where these adverse childhood experiences occur. Think about it. Most of us know somebody who lost a parent or lost a friend to gun violence, those kinds of things. And those are triggers for folks. Youth of color also bear tremendous burdens of racial discrimination, which is also associated with suicidal behaviors. And same thing with homophobia, transphobia, those kinds of things. And studies suggest that being discriminated against or feeling that as a young person, 6 years of age for Black youth, it starts out early. And Black adolescents who perceive racial discrimination are more than three times more likely to experience suicidal thoughts, make suicidal plans, and attempt suicide than their counterparts. And then last thing, there's these experiences of racism in the medical system often contribute to Black families' unwillingness to seek treatment. So we've got issues and concerns going on that all human beings do, but we're less likely to seek treatment because of racism and sometimes perceived and sometimes very much real racism in the medical system. And then also these implicit biases that exist can lead to misclassification of mental health concerns experienced by Black children. And so it all combines to show that there is a significant uptick in the issues and the concerns here. And there's a lack of willingness to deal with it, to acknowledge it, or to get treatment for very real and very real reasons. So your work is focused on this. Those are just some facts that I found in research online, but tell me about your real life experiences. And then let's turn this table and try to see how we can address this. But at the end of the day, what comes to mind for me is, my God, our babies are hurting.
Yeah. Ricky, I actually have been, some of the stats that you quoted there are related to work that I've personally done. Some of that's my work, right? And along with my colleagues. I think about Ryland Tyhagen and Seven Bridges are two kids that I did not personally get to meet, but I met their mothers and have done extensive interviews and conversations with them around this topic because of the work that I'm doing. So Rylan, 11 years old, Seven Bridges, 10 years old. And in both instances, their moms came home to find them deceased. I won't get into the details, but deceased. And in both instances, these mothers asked me as an expert in this space, they asked me, why did I come home to find my son deceased? Help me to understand that, because I had no idea, did not see any warning sign. I mean, just think about that for a moment. To leave your child at home in one condition and to come home, back home, and find them no longer with us. So Ryland's mom, Natasha Chambers, said to me, I want you to tell my story so that it can help some other family. It can save some other child. But at the end of all of this, I want you to come back to me and help me to understand, why did I come home to find my son dead? Why? And I think about that every single day that I get up to do this work, because you named it. The reality is that we don't have any definitive answers to why at this point, but we've called for more research to be funded to help us to understand. And I'm thankful, because of our advocacy and because of the work of Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, who is an angel, because when we brought these matters to her attention, she said, we're going to do something about it. She didn't pay lip service to it, Ricky, and those who are listening. She said, we're going to do something about it, and convened an emergency task force of the Congressional Black Caucus on Black youth suicide. And as you mentioned, I chaired the working group of experts who created the report, the Ring the Alarm report, The Crisis of Black Youth Suicide in America. And I said in a congressional briefing that if suicide was historically a Black issue, meaning that we know for some time that Black kids are dying by suicide at higher rates, but then all of a sudden white kids, for their rates of engagement in suicide behaviors increased and spiked in the ways that we've seen it for Black kids, there would be an outcry. There would be a ring the alarm moment. You wouldn't be able to go anywhere without hearing the fact that this is an epidemic among white youth. So why is it that in the case of Black kids, their humanity, their lives seemingly doesn't matter, right? And that's why there's hope, in the sense that Bonnie Watson Coleman and members of the Congressional Black Caucus said, we're going to do something about it. And there's legislation that has been passed in the House, and it's making its way through the Senate. There was a reintroduction of the legislation 2 weeks ago that is calling for the appropriation of more resources. How do you get education in the schools? How do you help parents understand the signs and indications that their children may be at risk? How do we get more research on being able to document and track these factors? And, for me, that has been an installation of hope. Taraji Henson has been a part of, the actress, has been a part of this work. We worked alongside her, calling out these matters and bringing attention to it. And the Boris L. Henson Foundation, if you Google it, even, can help you identify a culturally competent therapist. They are developing a registry of therapists that look like us, talk like us, and know our unique experience which is important for some people
It's
if they're
super
going to make this journey.
super important, yeah. Because I did therapy for a while, and people who listen to the show know that. And it was important to have a culturally competent therapist because you want to be in a situation where you can get the most benefit out of therapy, and you can unpack the things that are challenges for you. And it's difficult to do that when you've got to educate the therapist on your experiences and let them know why something that's normal for a white person to do every day is unheard of for a person of your particular racial background or your cultural experience, or why something that's normal for you, they don't understand why you would do it. You've got it. That's a bridge too far for some people, and you're not comfortable talking to somebody who, fairly or unfairly, you assume is going to misinterpret where you're coming from or not understand what you're trying to share, and the community that you sit in, and why you move a certain way or why things are perceived a certain way. So it's really important. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I wanted to call that out, that there's such a lack of diversity in the ranks, and we'll speak to that in more detail. But encourage more folks of color to join the ranks of health professionals and social workers, because we need them. The countries are getting more diverse, and so we need the professionals to be as diverse as the country, if at all possible.
Absolutely. And I am opening my door to the Silver School of Social Work for anybody who, especially, comes from any historically marginalized community. We really need more folks from these historically marginalized communities in this space to support others who are coming along with similar experiences and don't see a way out. Certainly don't see it relevant to talk to a therapist because, as you mentioned, they perceive that they're not going to have uh, an authentic, affirming experience. So the Silver School of Social Work is open and ready to, give you what you need to launch you into your career.
Absolutely. Maybe we want to get you guys to buy some advertising, so we'll talk about that. But you mentioned, and I'm glad that more research is being done. That's really important. But I also think that there are some things that uh, become very obvious very quickly, right? In terms of what's helping to create this challenge. I don't have science behind it, but it's common sense, right? And I think it's important to call it out, because we live in this myth of American exceptionalism.
Hmm.
And actually, our reality, particularly right now, is more like the freaking Hunger Games. We got toxic,
Right.
divisive politics. We've got, this unintentional, quite often, emotional abuse of children by stressed out, underserved parents. You've got this abhorrent form of Christianity that we seem to like to practice here, where it feels more like a hate cult than an actual cult of love around and service of discipleship to Jesus. And when children are watching this, children are experiencing these things, children, people who are trying to figure out who they are and how they feel as a person in terms of gender or whatever, are being attacked. First of all, it's horrible to attack any human being, but to attack children that way, it just seems just horrific to me and unconscionable. But it's happening on a daily basis. Look at Florida, for God's sake. And so that's all, obviously, on some level, that's contributing to this mental health crisis that we're experiencing in this country, by the way. Not just with kids, it's across the board. And then on top of the crisis, there's not enough people to treat and to deal with people who are in crisis. So I think there's, when you think about it as a problem, I think we all have to really take a moment, sit down, get out of your politics. Yes, embrace spirituality, but get out of think about what your religion and what your particular faith, whatever it may be, means to you and what it's calling you to be. And in particular, Christianity, because I'm a Christian, so I can speak to this. It's calling us to love. It's not calling us to judge. It's not calling us to hate. If you believe what you believe about people and where they're going to go, let that be between them and their God, between them and their Savior. But you're called to love. And I think if we could just, each and individual one of us, focuses on what we can do to protect and to encourage positive mental health in ourselves, those that we love, those that are extended family, those in our community. If we just start to be a little more kind to each other, we can start to correct this problem, and then the research will show us all the other things we need to do. But I think we have a contribution that each and every one of us can make, and we really are called to make. I mean, you look at Twitter, for God's sake, it's a cesspool of negativity. I mean, it's bad for my mental health. And a lot of these, TV shows people watch, you think about reality shows and how people treat each other in those shows. I mean, it's really kind of horrific. And so, yes, it's a huge issue. Yes, we don't have enough resources. Yes, there are challenges and it seems insurmountable, but there's a lot of stuff that each and every one of us can do to start to turn the corner. And I think we have a responsibility to do
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. Yeah, just to lean into love, it's so important to embrace the spirit of love for all humanity, no matter how it shows up or identifies, is the key to it all. And, the thing that I often ask myself and I ask others to think of is that if you identified a certain way or looked a certain way, would you want someone to disparage you, treat you poorly, based on how you look or how you identify? I mean, to bring it close to home and really ask yourself,
Mm-hmm.
like, do you want to be hated upon, mistreated? No one wants that. I don't know anyone who goes around looking for, yeah, hate me, mistreat me. Like, I want that.
Yeah,
And so, why is it that we don't have the capacity or we can't find the space to treat others like we want to be treated?
that's real. Michael, I'd take it a step further because I think, unfortunately, so many of us are so selfish that I would take it a step further and say, and fine, if you don't have the capacity for that, think about it this way. You want to live your life in peace. You want to have a wonderful life for yourself and yours. What in you thinks that you're going to create a peaceful, beautiful life, a peaceful, thriving country and society if you're oppressing and harming significant portions of the society? There will never be peace. There will never be a efficiently functioning society as long as we're engaged in this kind of hate and oppression of other people. Live and let live. Love and let love. If for no other reason than your own selfish desire to have a wonderful life, create the conditions to have a peaceful, wonderful life. Because I think, this noble call to treat others as you'd like to be treated, and that's great, but clearly that's not working. But look at it this way. You think you're going to have peace doing this to other people? It's not going to happen. So if nothing else, if for no other reason than your own selfish goals, live and let live.
Yeah. It makes me think, Ricky, about something that I've been trying to lean into more,
Mhm.
which is that when we hear mental health, and I really pray that what I'm about to say helps someone. When we think about mental health, we don't often think about the continuum of it, right? So at one end, you have mental illness and the constraints associated with depression or anxiety, trauma, whatever the case may be. But then at another end of it, you have mental health,
Right.
health, well being.
Yeah.
And just as important it is to take care of yourself if you're struggling with a mental illness, it's also important to affirm and be activated around your mental health. And what do I mean by that? I've been trying to more and more embrace this sort of notion of gratitude and thankfulness, which is actually associated with your mental health.
Yes. Speak.
Like what are things that I'm thankful for? What do I want to give gratitude to? Or even humility
Hmm.
is part of your mental health.
Hmm.
You don't know it all, or it's a sign of strength to ask for help. That is a part of your mental health that needs to be affirmed.
Yeah. And just embracing, literally embracing love.
And love.
Love makes you feel good. Love releases positive, life affirming uh, emotions, number one, but also hormones. Like there are things that happen in your body when you're joyful. There are
Absolutely.
things that happen in your
Absolutely.
body when you're smiling, and to
Yes.
do that is important. No, I'm glad you share that. That's important. And the other thing too is people need to understand. And I've said this before, but people need to understand this. You do not have to understand to love. You do
Mm.
not have to understand who somebody is to love them. You don't have to understand how they identify to love them. You don't have to understand why they're being what they're being to love them. Just love, because that love not only can help to heal them, but it can help to heal you. And you also spoke on something earlier, with relation to your dad or whatever. And I think this is also another important contribution to mental health, which is forgiveness. All things can be forgiven. And forgiveness is mostly for the person who is forgiving because it allows you to move forward. It allows you to heal. It allows you to get out of the moment of trauma or the perceived wrong that was done to you. You can move forward with your life and build the kind of life you want to live. But you can't do that unless or until you forgive. So that's
Yeah,
actually another great component to contribute to your mental health. So yeah, thank you for calling that out, Dr. Lindsey.
I totally agree. I totally agree. Yeah, no question. Just leaning into that more and more. What are the things that are going to, sort of make me mentally healthy? And I think love, forgiveness, all those kinds of things are really important to tap into.
Yeah.
And
And when you're who you're created to be, it's going to make you feel good. So take the time, do the work to go inside and figure out what your gifts are and what brings you joy. And once you figure out what those things are, how can I make a life and a living for myself doing these things and contributing in these ways? That stuff makes you joyful because joyful is a constant. It's like a pilot light that's always burning inside you from being and doing who you are made to be and doing the things you're made to do. Happiness, that's temporary. You're happy when you have a lot of money. You're happy when you have a good meal. You're happy when you have good sex. You're happy, but it's temporary because once the thing outside of you is taken away, then it's taken away. But joy comes from being who you were created to be, knowing whose you are, and just being that. Joy kind of emanates from that. So another way to be happy is just to be joyful. I mean, is to really understand who you are and to be that. And man, clearly the podcast is a ministerial move for me, right? It's not enough to identify a problem. We've got to leave people with hope instead of despair. And I think we're engaged in that in this moment. I want to ask you another specific question though. What are signs parents can look for to in their kids to identify if there might be an issue? And what are things that you say to parents whose kids might be having a challenge mentally, and to understand, because I know I read in the research too that quite often parents feel guilty about the struggles that their children are may having, and sometimes candidly the parent might have something to do with it, but oftentimes not. They don't, and that guilt then stops them from seeking the help that the child needs. So what are things parents can look for, and how are ways parents can show up and give the parents some help, give them a toolkit to kind of help them along the way, because it's tough.
yeah, and I'm going to try to make this as very simple and non-complex as possible, right?
Please.
Because anytime you're talking about human behavior is very complex.
Hmm.
And so, just to simplify this, I say to parents that you have a good idea of how your child functions on a normal basis, right? You just know your child.
Yeah.
And if you start to see a change in how they show up and function, that is a sign that you need to lean in a little bit more and try to understand what is going on in their life, right? So a change in functioning is critical to understanding that, you know what, I need to lean in. And then oftentimes what we see with kids in particular is that there's a lot of irritability.
Mm-hmm.
Don't talk to me. They may be even argumentative about things that is seemingly a constant, right? But the irritability is another indication. Also, if you start to see that your child is not eating or that they're overeating, you
Mm.
know, that is a sign that you might want to lean in. And then finally, I'll say, and we actually did a study on this and learned from kids that when they're dealing with issues like depression, what kids might do is isolate themselves and be withdrawn.
Yeah.
They may stay in their room or be connected to their game like all day long. And we learn from kids themselves that when they're feeling that way, they actually want their loved ones, family or friends, to actually check in with them about how they're feeling or what's going on in their world. Like they want you to pull it out,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is really interesting. That blew me away. Like I didn't realize that kids want that.
And I would
So
I would argue with my own moment of mental health and suicidal thoughts that that might even go across the spectrum for all human beings, because there was an element of that in me. I wanted people to pull it out. Of course, that's not necessarily fair because people don't know, because they
right,
presume that you're a joyful,
right.
successful, happy person. So when they're not pulling it out, then you have this increased sense of isolation, which then puts you further into that box of despair, and it's a cycle. So that's really interesting to hear you share that.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. That's so true that a lot of folks really want that to be the case. And in fact, there is actually, research that documents that if a person, the time between a person is thinking about a suicide attempt and actually attempting suicide, and then this is among adults,
Mm-hmm.
is about 10 minutes before they actually, on average, think about suicide and attempt it. But what protects people from actually attempting suicide is to be connected with folks and to be in proximity to loved ones and supporters. It protects them from
Mm-hmm.
engaging in a suicide attempt. So yes, I would argue as well that although we found that to be the case in kids, it's across the board. So those are the signs. What we can do about it is obviously get connected to support.
Mm-hmm.
What you can do is to begin that process by asking kids to check in with their feelings. And I think it's so important for parents and loved ones to help kids be able to articulate their emotions, because oftentimes it might show up as irritability or they may start crying because that's the only way they know how to express it.
Yeah.
And so getting them to talk about what it is that concerns them, what they're feeling as a result of it is so important because it gives them the language then to be able, it's like a foreign language, right? Like when you understand how to communicate what is happening with you, it's so empowering,
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that that's really important. Oftentimes I tell parents, don't just ask your kid how they're doing, but ask them how they're feeling
Yeah.
and really help them to tap into their feelings, to label it. Then you might have an opportunity to partner with them on, because it is a partnership on like, let's get connected to a professional so we can talk about it. And I do believe that it's so important to talk to a professional.
And shouldn't you, as you ask your kids about how they're feeling, shouldn't you, with certain guardrails, obviously,
Mhm.
model that behavior by sharing with them how you're feeling?
You should totally do that. Absolutely. Yeah. You have to model what that looks like,
Hmm.
and give that's a wonderful opportunity to give kids that space for being able to be invited into a space where they are able to share their feelings.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you touched on that I want to highlight too is that there are often times when parents are reluctant to reach out to a therapist because they're going to hear from the therapist or counselor that it's about their bad parenting.
Hmm.
And I will, that's where I think, it's important to understand mental illness challenges, what it looks like, because some of this stuff, or a lot of it, I would say, is actually ingrained in our system,
Hmm.
and just waiting for an opportunity for an environmental context to shape that experience. So
Yeah.
just like you have diabetes or hypertension that runs in your family, it's baked into your DNA. Um, there may be anxiety that's pre-existing, or depression that's pre-existing,
Hmm.
and there's something that happens in the environment that shapes it. So I think we just need to understand that in a way that then gives us greater appreciation for the fact that it's not so much what we're doing, but it's the world and context we live in. And we have to be on our best in terms of trying to do something about it. And we can do something about it. I'll just close with this. A lot of the mental health issues that we know about and treat are actually highly treatable.
Hmm.
You can actually recover from depression or anxiety or trauma. You can live a healthy, full life that is not connected to that experience.
We're living proof of it.
Yeah, totally, totally. And so it's not something that is, not, it's highly treatable, in other words. And I
Hmm.
just want to leave with that, right?
And
That
that's
you can do
that's
something about it.
that's good to know. People need to know that. They need to know that there is hope and it is treatable. And I want to leave us with this. I think we should model the behavior we talked about. So I'm going to say that I am feeling uh, concern and care and stress with what's happening to humanity and absolutely with my people. Um, I love our babies, and it breaks my heart to know that they're suffering at the way that they are. But at the same time, I am feeling hopeful. I am feeling encouraged to know that people like you are in the world doing this good work, knowing that there are things that each of us can do in our own lives and the lives of those around us to make things better, and that this is absolutely something that we can change. We just have to have the awareness of the subject and the will to make a difference. And that those things are here now, those tools exist, and we can make a difference. So, as emotional as I may feel on the inside about it, I know that there is a way forward, a path forward, and I'm doing the little bit that I can do to help affect change. And I'm grateful for people like you doing the same. What are you feeling right now in conclusion?
Yeah, no, I was thinking that um, maybe 15, 20 years ago, I'm not sure if there was an opportunity or a venue to have this conversation, right? And I'm thankful to God, thankful to you for heeding the call, the mission to serve in this way. And I'm thankful that we have this opportunity to share information and to convey that there is hope, there is an opportunity to do something about it, right? It is incredibly sad to hear the stories or to do the analyses that we've done to uncover what we're learning. But I get up every day and I hear the words of Rylanti's Hagen's mom in my head, asking for me to return to her one day with the answers. And I am on a dogged mission, if you will, like unrelenting to bring greater attention to this issue, first and foremost, through my work, and to work with others in partnership. And this conversation is included in that space of work to do something about it. Right now, in this moment, we are doing something about it. We are responding to Ryland Ty Hagen's mom's request. So I'm very, very much appreciative to you and thankful to you again for listening to the voice of God and providing this platform and moment for this discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Lindsey. Everybody watching, everybody listening, know this. You are not alone. Humanity, we love you. Black people, we love you. And to all our babies, we absolutely love you. You may or may not have an example of it right around you or in your life, but know that there are men who don't even know who you are, that you're alive, who care about you. There are people who are working on your behalf. You are not alone. We can and we will make a difference, and we will turn this around. You are loved. Thank you, Dr. Lindsey. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Ricky.
And looking forward. We're going to share some helpful links in the show notes. Is there anything you want to share that you'll call out for folks real quick before we go, or where
Yeah.
people can?
So a couple of things. Definitely Google the Boris L. Henson Foundation, Taraji P. Henson. I love the work that Taraji and Tracy Jade are doing in this space. The Black Mental Health Alliance is another website you can Google that has a lot of great resources. The National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, NAMI, is a really great group that, importantly, they articulate that if a family member is struggling with a mental illness, it is a family illness. It's not just that individual's illness. It's the family's illness. And it's treatable in a family context. So I love the work that NAMI does. Again, the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. Ricky, you'll share those resources with folks. And then the last thing I'll say, if there is an immediate need, an emergency that you're seeing in terms of a mental health crisis, do not call 911. Call 988, which is a national hotline that is focused on addressing mental health issues. Groundbreaking.
Yeah, that's great.
Again, don't call 911, call 988 so that a mental health professional can show up and get you connected to the right supports.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you for all the work that you do. And we're going to wrap there, but that's Dr. Micharel A. Lindsey. And all you young professionals thinking about what you might want to do in your life, consider social work. The world needs you. Have a good day, everybody.